And next, without further ado, Robbe Healey. I got to tell you, when I came to Philadelphia in 1983, and when I got to LaSalle's Nonprofit Center and became the director a decade later, Robbe Healey was somebody whose name kept coming up. And then when I came out to Chester County and found out that she's right here in our backyard, I was thrilled. So Robbe, some of you know Robbe. She's been a trainer internationally, trainer and consultant for longer than I even want to admit, and has been doing exemplary work throughout the country, helping nonprofits to maximize their potential. Robbe's going to talk tonight with you about high impact boards. And there's a lot to this presentation. I think she's going to give a lot of information. Some of it, I'd ask, you can apply immediately. Other, you're going to have to put in your back pocket and know it's there, and call us when you want help taking it out. All right, so there's a lot to cover. Robbe, would you want to come up? And you're on a lavalier mic, aren't you? So we're going to let you have the show. You all have handouts. If there's extras there, take them with you. This is all online as well. And we're videotaping so that you can look at this every single day. Or not. Or not. Robbe, the floor is yours.
I want to thank Karen and Zeb for the invitation to be with you this evening. And I was listening to all of your preliminary comments about what challenges you have and what aspirations you have. And again, tonight we're going to talk about the role of board members. So I have a question for you first. If you're willing, raise your hand if in your youth, in your childhood, the people who raised you, your parents or the caregivers who raised you, if they served on the board of a 501c3 nonprofit in your community, not a congregation if you're a person of faith, but a 501c3 nonprofit, how many of you had parents who served on nonprofit boards? Look around the room. My hand's up as an example. My parents did not. Thank you for raising your hands. Think about the stuff you love to do. Not necessarily your vocation, but your avocation. For some of us, it was something you aspired to learn as an adult. I took up pottery. I was not exposed to that as a child. I wanted to learn that, and I was very intentional about that. I also love to swim. I grew up in the Midwest. If you've ever lived there or if you grew up there, we swim in swimming pools. Lakes and rivers have watercraft on them. We rarely swim in them. So I can never remember a time in my life when I didn't know how to swim. I learned to swim in the YWCA pool in the basement in Burlington, Iowa. That's where the pool was. The pool was in the basement of the YWCA. I can never remember not knowing how to swim. My daughter, when I moved here, my daughter was 3, and we bought a house, don't groan, we bought a house that wasn't air conditioned. We moved in Labor Day, the weekend of Labor Day weekend. I'd never lived this far south. We didn't realize we needed an air conditioned house. So it's hotter than blue blazes. Her dad is off working because he sold farm machinery and it was the middle of the summer. And it is so hot, all I want to do is take this 3-year-old to the pool. Now the 3-year-old, when she was 8 days old, had learned to swim in the YMCA pool in Liverpool, New York. The 8 days the cord dropped off, we're in the water. She couldn't remember a time when she couldn't swim either. So we bought a townhouse in a townhouse community that had one of those giant pools. It's almost Labor Day weekend. There's nobody in the big pool. I happen to be an extrovert. I didn't care about meeting anybody. I just wanted Amelia and me in the water. So there's this phenomenon going on where the baby pool, the round circle pool, was packed. All the women sitting on the edge, all the kids in there like sardines, but who cares? So we go up for the 3 days. The pool closes because it's Labor Day, and I join the babysitting co-op. I make friends, Amelia makes friends. Memorial Day comes around, the pool opens again. We go up, and nobody in the big pool. A few teenage boys who hadn't figured out that the pool was boring yet, they were there. But Amelia and I are the only non-teenage boys in the pool. All the women, all the moms in the big circle, all the kids standing there. Well, now Amelia starts whining. She wants Jenny to swim with her in the pool. And of course, we'd already joined the Y. She was swimming, doing the swimming lessons. We're doing all the stuff. And I go to Carol, Jenny's mom, and I said, Amelia would really love to have someone to play with in the pool. Can Jenny come in the pool with us? No, she doesn't know how to swim. I'm like, and this is a true story. I had come off just working for the Girl Scouts for 10 years. I had all the Red Cross certification you could possibly imagine. Water safety instructor, CPR, life-saving, all the things. So I tell Carol, blah, 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 would you let me show her how to swim? So Carol brings her lawn chair, and it was one of those, remember those folding chairs with the webbing? They were light and everybody had them. So Carol drags her chair over to the edge, and she is sitting at the edge of the pool like a first-time flyer in a turbulent flight. Her knuckles are white. Now, fortunately, Jenny hadn't figured out it was terrifying to be in the pool. So by the end of 2 weeks, she was jumping into me. She's doing monkey crawling to get to the ladder. She's swimming a little bit, more dog paddling than swimming, but she felt okay in the water. And what's happening? All these people circling the pool are coming to me one at a time. Would you teach my boys to swim? Would you teach my whatever? Healey's giving free swimming lessons. Why wouldn't you sign up? So back to the what do you love? And when did it come to you? Well, some of the things you probably like to do as adults might have been things that you learned in your family of origin as a younger child. You were exposed to them. Maybe it's a hobby, maybe it's a sport that you play, or music, or something, whatever it is. So if you think about all these people in the pool, what I later discovered was they never did swim. They went to the shore. I finally learned down the shore is not dinosaur. I literally thought these people were going to the dinosaur golf tournament in Palm Springs, California. I'm not kidding. I grew up in Chicago and then lived in Syracuse. I didn't know down the shore. So anyway, bottom line is they waded and they tanned, but they didn't swim. So we're all here in a room together tonight to talk about board governance. Most of us didn't grow up in a family where board governance was part of the DNA of the family. We also have, in this country and culture, for better or for worse, actually for worse, we are trained from adolescence, when you're a grown-up, don't admit what you don't know in front of other grown-ups. So you join a board, you're supposed to do fundraising. You're supposed to do governance. You're not supposed to micromanage the staff and do operations. You're supposed to be strategic and generative and safeguard the mission and make sure that you've got enough money to do the work. You're supposed to predict the future of the needs of the organization, and you're supposed to collaborate together as one happy team. Not groupthink, but collaborative. But you never learned how to do that. So it's like the women in the baby pool who never learned how to swim. So by the end of this evening, I hope some of you will be willing to admit that as a group, we need some swimming lessons. Because you wouldn't be in this room if you didn't care about the mission. I heard that in your why do you volunteer? You don't volunteer for an organization whose mission you don't treasure. If you do, you're kind of a fraud, and you wouldn't be in this room. But at the same time, if you haven't learned how to do the work, and if you're not willing to be part of the group that says, I'd really like to be in the big pool, but I don't know how to swim, tonight can be the beginning of getting into the water. For some of you, you've already been in the water for a while. Some of your organizations, every organization is a different life stage of maturity. Every board is at a different stage. And tonight, as we go through the material, we're going to talk about 3 very distinctive sets of board governance responsibilities and blend them all together. I believe that you will find similarities with where your board is right now. And it's just a baseline. It's not a criticism, it's not an affirmation, it's a baseline. And wherever you are now, you can evolve. You talked about that when Zeb was giving you a chance to give your feedback. I want to keep evolving as an organization. And there are ways to do that. But when you think about it, if you're willing to raise the bar by saying, I do need a few lessons, you can really advance the work of the organization whose time you're spending your time on. So back to the swimming pool. At the end of the summer, there were a bunch of kids going off the diving board. Some of them were actually diving. A lot of them were still jumping. But they were swimming competently enough that they could go in and get to the side. Then there was the group clinging to the shallow end. They were in the pool, though. They liked being in the pool. They thought the pool was cool. They really wanted to get better, but they were still in the shallow end. And then there were the people in the middle. That's a typical board. You've got the people in the deep end all the time. Those are the ones doing all the work. Then you've got the people in the shallow end. Those, quite frankly, are the ones you have to beg to do some of the work. Probably not very, if any. Probably no one in that group is in here because you wouldn't be here tonight if that was your thing. And then you've got the people in the middle. In your lane, doing your stuff. Maybe to get out of your lane, somebody has to invite you, encourage you. But as you think about the evolution of a board, I want to make one comment that I hadn't planned in my PowerPoint. BoardSource, which used to be the National Center for Nonprofit Boards, BoardSource says they survey boards continuously. And the typical board in the United States today fluctuates between 16 and 18 members. If you think about the 80-20 rule, and I actually have the 10-80-10 rule, 10% of the people are doing all the things all the time. 10% of the people never show up. And 80% in the middle are doing stuff when it fits, and you ask them and you assign. If we could get it to be the 33-33 rule and the pool, 33% of the people doing stuff all the time, maybe 33% doing a little bit, but at least they're doing something. And then the 33 in the middle, you would have a whole different engagement. And we are going to talk about governance and board recruitment. But think about admitting, yeah, I'm willing to take the swimming lessons, because that starts the evolution from wherever you are today to where you want to go next. So, swimming lessons for all. So today we're going to talk about a little bit about trends. What are the trends in the nonprofit sector right now? We're also going to talk about the legal responsibilities of nonprofit board members, and I'd imagine most of you are pretty familiar with that. And that may be the baseline that you're working with right now. We're going to do a deeper dive into the 10 essential responsibilities of nonprofit boards again. That's the work of BoardSource, and some of you may have been focused on that. And we're also going to talk about the governance as leadership model, Chait, Ryan, and Taylor's work out of the Hauser Center for Nonprofits, which in my opinion is one of the best comprehensive discussions of how boards move fluidly between and among responsibilities that's in the marketplace today. Then we're going to look at how you knit all the models together. How do you make sure you're doing all the legal responsibilities continuously, maximizing the 10 essential responsibilities, and moving fluidly between fiduciary, strategic, and generative governance? And then we've got 2 activities for you to do in your table groups, and we're going to do that towards the end so that you will have an opportunity to think about the things we've talked about, hopefully do an honest assessment of what things you're doing today and have them as takeaways. And again, as Karen said, the worksheets will be available on the website so that you can download them and use them. So when you think about why you serve on nonprofit boards, and you mentioned a lot of these, personal commitment to the cause. And again, why would you serve on a board if the mission didn't really excite you and motivate you? A desire to make a meaningful impact, professional or leadership development, community involvement and civic engagement. I didn't hear you talk about networking and relationship building. But I think for many of us, serving on a board has become part of our professional networking opportunity, and we build relationships within the community with like-minded individuals who care about the same things. Personal fulfillment and purpose and influence and advocacy. And of course, there were others that were mentioned as you were talking. As we think about the reasons we serve, and you think about who you're going to recruit to your board, oftentimes they are the very same models. They're the very same things that appeal to you. Sometimes not. One of the things that's interesting about professional skills is, as board members, we don't use our professional skills in a day-to-day sense. We use them in an advisory sense. And that's a slippery slope, and one that many of us have a hard time with. And that's the trying not to micromanage the staff. So the trends, the most significant trends that are affecting nonprofit boards today in terms of governance are DEI, DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And of course, the federal conversation about the appropriateness of that is a challenge for some organizations. It's a given for some. It's some that others haven't really started talking about. But at the same time, we're all aware of how that has been unfolding. The issue for me is, how do we integrate effectively with dignity people with lived experience into the conversation so that all the people who need to be at the table are sitting at the table? Because if we are prescribing rather than engaging, we run the risk of missing the mark. So DEIB is clearly one. Strategic use of data for governance and oversight. And you talked about that. I want to be more data-driven. The interesting thing about that is, do you have the capacity to gather the data that you want to see? Do you have the tools and the access? Because gathering data is not necessarily an easy thing to do. So as a board governs, what is the data that you need to ensure that you're fulfilling your strategic plan? And if you don't have access to it yet, can you actually gather it? Do you have the tools to gather it? Do you have the staff capacity to gather it? And do you have the bandwidth on the board to understand it? But it clearly is a conversation that many boards are having today. A growing demand for generative governance, and we're going to talk about that. That's clearly a part of Chait, Ryan, and Taylor's work. But generative governance is, what's the future look like? Not how do we stay in business today, but how do we stay in business today while we've got our eyes on the prize? The next one is blurring the boundaries between board and management. And most of us, unless we own our own company or have a very high-level position, most of us don't spend our time during the day developing strategies. We implement tactics for other people. So when you come in the boardroom, the skill you bring is tactical implementation. How do you step back and say, I trust the staff to do the work, and if the outcomes they're creating are consistent with the strategies we established, it's not my job to tell them what tactics to use to get to the strategic outcome. And you can call yourself on that, because if you're blurring the lines, you're setting up an environment where there's a trust gap. and heightened expectations for transparency and ethical governance. Transparency's been a thing for a while, and it's not going away, and it's something that we will continue to be concerned about. The current trends for board recruitment, and you talked about this, strategic skills-based recruitment. Instead of the same people in the room talking about who do we know, who can we get, really being very focused on what are the skills, the abilities, the interests, and the attributes of the people we need, and are they willing to use them with us? And we're going to talk about governance committees as a year-round activity, not as a nominating function once a year. Focused on involving people with lived experience and broad community representation. And we need to be mindful of the fact that if our board has been kind of a closed loop, do people with lived experience feel welcomed at the table and in the conversation? And do we have a culturally competent board that will welcome people with different experience? And if we don't, we may need to do some homework before we can invite those people to join us with dignity and success. Broad and transparent outreach. I happen to chair the governance committee, and my executive director is here, Jeff Spencer. I chair the governance committee for the Housing Partnership. And we do a lot of conversation about recruitment and outreach, and how do we get outside of our normal silo in order to really look for people who are in the right parts of the county, that have the right skills, that want to serve with us. And our recruitment process takes at least 4 months, from identifying a person who might be interested to qualifying them and them qualifying us, and orientation, and then joining the board. So you can't do it when you've got a month till your annual meeting and you've got 5 slots to fill. Well, just saying. You've heard of this. I hear the giggles. Onboarding and engagement from day one. I worked in an organization where our CEO believed you needed to serve on the board for a full year before you should be asked to join a committee. You're the most excited when you're new. So we've given them a year to be passive and detached. That didn't work. So is recruitment aligned with fundraising and advocacy needs? Everybody's favorite, you gotta raise money. We're gonna talk about that at the end. But you do have to do that, and you all know that, but you didn't take the lessons, and it makes you scared, so we're gonna talk about that. So the first baseline is the legal responsibilities of nonprofit boards. Duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience. And of course, most of you are probably very familiar with this. Duty of care, you have to make informed judgments. You have to do your due diligence. You have to get advice when you need it, perhaps from external consultants or professionals. And as you're moving into new territory, make sure you've done all your homework. It doesn't mean you can't be nimble. It just means you have to be thorough. And you have to proactively participate in all of those discussions. Duty of loyalty, you as the board member have to act in the best interests of the organization. It's interesting, probably one of the questions I get more often than not is, can you have somebody on your board who does business with your nonprofit? In my opinion, you absolutely can. But you have to have an excellent conflict of interest policy that board members sign every single year, not once when they were onboarded that they forgot about. And your board agenda, at the beginning of the board agenda, you have to call for statement of conflicts of interest if any exist. You can do it, but you have to be willing to enforce it. And if you're just paying lip service to it, you're going to sabotage yourself. But the duty of loyalty then is, even if you are in a business relationship with the nonprofit on whose board you serve, you can't participate in those discussions. And that's easy. You're out of the room. But again, you have to be willing to do that. The other piece of this is respecting confidentiality. Respecting the confidentiality of what's discussed in the boardroom. You could have a sensitive negotiation going on, and if somebody blabs, you'll never guess what we're trying to work on. you can sabotage that kind of activity. And unfortunately, in my lived experience as a staff member, I can remember one of those where a board member kind of got out ahead of himself, and a real estate deal that the company was trying to do got sabotaged because he was bragging about the fact that our organization was working on that. So that's really cone of silence. Doesn't mean not transparent, but it does mean confidential when you need to be confidential. And the duty of obedience. You have policies, you have procedures, you have board position descriptions, you have all of the documents that govern the work. You have to be obedient to those. That's just the baseline. That's just the beginning. That is not the whole package. And for some of you, for the boards you're on, that may be the orientation that your board has. And you've at least got a really strong start. So when we move into the next piece, which I think is where a lot of boards were really aimed 10 years ago and perhaps still, BoardSource is an amazing repository of high quality resources for nonprofit boards. If you are not a member of BoardSource, you might want to think about having at least one member of your organization belong to that. There are dozens of free downloads when you're a member and resources that will really help you with the kinds of challenges you have. So the 10 basic responsibilities of nonprofit boards. Number 1, determine the mission and purpose. This shocks some board members. Some board members think the staff tells them the mission and purpose of the organization. Think about this. Every one of these organizations started with a group of highly passionate, dedicated volunteers. There were no staff then. When you got enough critical mass to hire staff, you did. Every one of you on a board is a successor of one of those founding volunteers. You are the guardians of the mission and purpose. Doesn't mean it can't evolve, but it does mean you have to really be careful about mission creep, going where you don't belong. But your statement of mission and vision and values is the board's responsibility. Now, we're all smart enough to know if you're going to change it or analyze it, you've got to do it as a trusting group of board and staff together. But at the end of that process, the board votes, the staff doesn't. So you are the guardians of that. You select the chief executive. You also support and evaluate the chief executive. And evaluate means holistic, the whole board is involved, but you need to make sure you're providing the right support for that individual and you're doing it as collaborative, respectful members of the same team. Ensure that you're doing effective planning. Strategic planning is a board accountability. I've actually worked with organizations who said, the board doesn't do strategic planning, the staff doesn't, they bring it to us and they tell us what it is. That may be the way it's working right now, but it's wrong. Again, we're all smart enough to know that if you've got a robust, productive, forward-looking strategic plan, you need to talk about it together. But at the end of the day, the board adopts the strategic plan, then the staff transforms it into a tactical business plan, while the board keeps the strategy piece on their own work plan. Yeah, they got a board work plan that comes out of the strategic plan. The staff doesn't do it all for them. But again, ensuring effective planning is a board accountability. You monitor and strengthen programs and services. You don't micromanage them. How do you strengthen them? By making sure they have appropriate resources to do the work you want to have done. Monitoring means if something's not going well, you have the courage to change it. It also means if you're adding a new program, you give it enough time to make sure it's working or not working before you pull the plug. So monitoring is different than managing. And keep in mind what I said earlier, most of us do tactics in our day jobs. So if the staff is getting the outcomes done, but not necessarily in the way you would do it if you were the staff member, that doesn't make it wrong, it only makes it different. So be very careful about what you're assessing and evaluating. Ensure adequate financial resources. This is everybody's favorite. So there are only 3 ethical revenue streams in the nonprofit sector. Public funding, which of course is a little bit tenuous right now because that's government contracts. Fee-for-service revenue. So can the food cupboard charge for what it wants? For what the clients, the customers take? Of course not. Can People's Light and Theater sell subscriptions and also raise money? Of course they can. So they've got fee-for-service revenue at People's Light. They don't have fee-for-service revenue at the food cupboard. So not every nonprofit can use that fee-for-service revenue stream. The only one left is philanthropy. Most of us need to take a lot of swimming lessons to be comfortable with philanthropy. But if you decide you want to do the whole board source thing, including number 6, ensuring financial resources, philanthropy's in there. Kay Sprinkle Grace has written a book about AAA boards where she says, 1/3 of your board has to be askers, 2/3 of your board need to be advocates, and 100% of your board needs to be ambassadors. She acknowledges that not all of us are going to be comfortable being askers in the room. So as you're looking at board recruitment, be very transparent that you're going to have to be out there as an advocate, as an ambassador, talking about us, what we do, why we do it. Now, I happen to be a Rotarian. I don't want you telling me every time, so if I see you at my Rotary meeting, I'm going to run away screaming because I don't want to hear the ambassador thing again. So you have to be appropriate with it, but talking about the work you do and why you do it. But we also have to be taught how to tell the story. So that becomes part of board governance, is teaching people not just how to ask, but also how to story tell. Every nonprofit I know of has amazing stories, but we don't tell them well enough. And one of the comments, I was writing down some notes as you were talking. The last comment I wrote down was being heard in a crowded marketplace. Is anybody familiar with the work of Dan Pallotta, his book Uncharitable? A few. Dan Pallotta wrote this book where he pretty much pillories American decision makers who say nonprofits can't invest in infrastructure and branding. And isn't it a conundrum? If we aren't doing enough branding and investing in enough storytelling, we're invisible, but we want to raise money. But if nobody's heard of us, they can't get excited about us. But we don't want to spend money on branding because it's overhead, and we don't want to get pilloried for spending money on overhead, so we don't do it. And then we're invisible, and then we can't raise money. And then we talk about, can we actually spend money on branding? Are we willing to stand up to the funders, and I'm talking about individuals now, to say, yes, we are proudly investing in storytelling because we want more people excited about what we do and how we do it so they can help us. Budgets are board policies. They are not staff policies. So when you budget to do your programs and you don't want to be invisible, then you're going to make a decision about investing in your future. Now, I am smart enough to know you don't have tens of thousands of dollars laying around to hire extra staff and do a lot more print and digital media. But you need to do some, and you need to do more as it gets better. But that's part of your consideration, is adequate financial resources. And are you spending the money on the right stuff? Do you look at the budget every time you pass a budget and align it with the strategic plan? And if you're not, could be a good activity to do. And most of us are approaching our budgeting season right now, so it can be very timely. Support and evaluate the CEO. So make sure that you're providing appropriate support for him, her, or them. What are the training opportunities they need? Do they need, or would they love to have an executive coach to help them develop a new or different skill? Are there associations they need to belong to? Are there tables they need to sit at so that you need to realign their position description so they are available to be at the tables they need to be sitting at and have somebody else doing the tactical work back in the office? So thinking very critically about how do you support their success, and then also how do you evaluate them in terms of the goals you set for them, the goals they set for themselves, and the outcomes they created. Ensuring effective planning, and we talked briefly about planning earlier, but if you're not looking at the broad planning once your strategic plan is crafted, you're missing a responsibility. That's where we put it on the shelf and ignore it until the funder says, you need an updated strategic plan because yours is 3 years old. Oh, yeah, right. Well, we better do a new one. But making sure you're on top of it year over year and period over period. Let's see, I'm going the wrong way here. Protect assets and provide proper financial oversight. Protecting assets is your physical plant and your reserve funds, but also oversight of the budget. Some of you probably have staff in a finance department, maybe a controller or a bookkeeper or a CFO. Not every organization does. But the finance committees need to be very, very attentive to the monthly financial reporting. Some of your boards meet quarterly. Your finance committees are certainly meeting monthly and making sure that things are on track. But as the board is developing the annual budget and looking at fiscal controls, are there outliers, things that you were anticipating that didn't happen, or opportunities you had that you didn't anticipate? So looking at fiscal oversight is a huge piece of the board's responsibility, but not every board member needs to be as invested in understanding the day-to-day cash flow as the members of the finance committee need to be. So part of the responsibility of the finance committee is to make the financial statements understandable by the rest of us, which doesn't mean they dummy it down, but it does mean that you highlight the things that are really important in terms of year over year, month over month, and monitoring. And from time to time, you may be borrowing for some project, you may be financing something, you may be looking at a new opportunity that requires capacity building, and those are the things that you as board members need to be very mindful of. Building a competent board. This is your governance committee's call to action. It is not the executive director's job to find the new board members. I am smart enough to know, and I'm not going to ask you to put up your hands, I'm smart enough to know that there are organizations where that is the expectation. And that, quite frankly, is wrong. As you transition into having a full-blown governance committee that does the year-round work of governance, the executive director, the CEO needs to be in the room when those conversations happen. They need to have the opportunity to meet the prospective board members, but they are not the recruiter and they are not the ultimate approver of who gets to join the board. It's always interesting to me when you do new board member orientation, who leads the discussion? If the CEO or the executive director is leading the discussion, that telegraphs to the new members, that's the person in charge of the board. But they're not. The board chair's in charge of the board. So the governance committee is responsible for making sure the board chair is oriented and comfortable with doing that onboarding role. And if that's a shift in your work, then the governance committee chair probably needs to have a role in that. Doesn't mean the governance committee chair should do it, because every officer needs to be involved in good onboarding, whether you're onboarding one person or 5 or 6 in a new class. And if that's not working for you yet, think about how you can evolve that. Because in my opinion, and experience, the most powerful committee on any board is the governance committee. You are the person that gets the people in the boat. I hate that bus analogy. I don't want people on the bus. They can be looking out the back. They can be hanging out the windows. But if we've got everybody, think about one of those giant shells with the 8 rowers. And if we could have a 16-rower shell, does a dragon boat have that many people? 20? Cool. Get them in a dragon boat. Everybody's got to be rowing in the same direction, or you don't go anyplace. That doesn't mean groupthink. It does mean headed in the same direction. So building a competent board. Ensuring legal and ethical integrity, and this, of course, goes back to the legal responsibilities we talked about a few minutes ago. But the board is ultimately responsible for adhering to the legal standards. And hopefully you all have directors and officers insurance for your boards, but at the same time, you can't be deliberately negligent. So making sure that you are in compliance with all the legal standards and enhancing your public standing. And doesn't that go with number 6? Because you can't fundraise if you don't have a strong brand image. It just doesn't work.